the idea of a collection of yeses versus the collective yes. I've identified a pain, but I don't necessarily know how to indicate that pain or implicate that pain. If the contract's not out, it's never going to be closed. The earlier that we can get that in front and uncover objections, uncover issues or challenges that might come up, the better. Your champion can have power and influence in many departments, but that one department that you need them to have power and influence in, they may not.
If you could go all the way back and advise Conor from 10 years ago, what would that advice be?
I think one would be probably be kind to yourself. Salespeople probably put the most pressure on themselves more than most. As the saying goes, we're really living for the 20% or the 30%, whatever that win rate is. The other 70% is you're losing. So you need to have thick skin and be ready to get up every day and go again.
Hey everyone, my name is Pim. I'm here with MEDDICC. This is our podcast show, Elite Dealers, where we talk about the best deals that some of the elite dealers in our industry have been bringing into their companies. Today, we are with an elite dealer from a customer that we get to partner with, GoCardless, and this person actually turned into sales leader right now. However, the deal that we'll be talking about is a deal that they recently did, not so long ago. So I'm pleased to introduce Conor.
Good morning, Pim. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. Really looking forward to chatting about some of the deals, how we use MEDDPICC, and sharing some wins along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so Conor, can you just, I already sort of shared it. You had a bit of a journey within GoCardless, I guess, in the last year or so. Is that fair to say? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess if I go back a little bit, I'm originally from Ireland. I moved out to the Middle East. I was out there for 7 years with the Irish government originally, and finished up with LinkedIn. Came back to Ireland, did my MBA, and decided I wanted to move into fintech. So there's a number of companies that I was looking at, and GoCardless was one of them, and decided to move over to London. So I've been with GoCardless now for about a year and a half, and started off as an IC, selling into our corporate and enterprise accounts, and then now just moved into emerging sales manager for UK and I, focusing on scaling startups with revenue between 0 and 30 million.
Oh, awesome. And how is that transition going for you from IC to leadership then?
Yeah, really good, to be honest. I think there's been a lot of roles and a lot of different things that I've done in my life where you are a leader without a title, and you have to show up, and that manifests itself in different ways. So I guess this time around, it's just having, 6 other people that I have to be mindful of and make sure that I'm showing up for them every day, right? It's not just me anymore. It's the other 6 people in the room. So that comes with an added responsibility, as you'll probably know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it does work like that indeed. Hey, so Conor, I see a lot of books on your shelves there. By the way, anything that you are reading right now, which you would recommend to our listeners here?
Yeah, I've been on a reading frenzy for the past 2 years. One book that I'm currently nearly finished is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Fantastic read. He's really good writer more than anything else. But if I was to give a recommendation of a book that's probably changed me the most, it's probably the 5 a.m. Club. I joined the 5 a.m. Club for my sins back in January, and I've been up every morning since, but it's probably transcended my life in terms of getting up and seizing the day. So I would probably recommend 5 a.m. Club, but also Shoe Dog is a great read as well.
Awesome, but just this puts a little question mark in my mind. Do you get up at 5 a.m. every morning still?
Yeah, still, yeah. So up this morning, bright and early, went and did my CrossFit session, and then back home. Usually get a bit about probably an hour and a half's reading in the morning, a coffee before anybody gets online and starts. So it's a bit of my safe haven, I guess, is in the morning time.
I think I might have listened to like a summary of that book. Isn't it that you do it together with a few other people as well, so that you hold each other accountable? Or
Well, yeah, I guess I'm lucky that my significant other is also getting up at that time. So if she
okay,
wasn't, she'd probably be pretty annoyed me getting and waking her up every morning at 5 a.m. So it definitely helps having somebody to hold you accountable. But then also in the CrossFit community as well, there's a lot of the same faces. So you might get a little message if you weren't there that morning to kind of encourage you to get in the next morning. So yeah, having that support system is always important.
yeah, very nice. Okay, um, well, thanks for sharing that insight with us. Hey, so we're gonna talk about one of the deals that you did before you turned a sales leader, right, Connor? So I guess that what we would want to know is like, what is this customer about? But also like, how did you find them? How did you first engage with them and sort of get the initial ball rolling there?
Yeah, so I think the customer that I'm going to speak today is one of the biggest credit consolidation companies in the UK. It was one of my top accounts for the year, so it was P1 priority one for that year, and something that I was keeping a close eye on, trying to strategize how I'd outbound it. One part of that is we're lucky enough at GoCardless where we have a big sales stack, right? We have Sales Navigator, we have Zoom Info, we have Quant Copy, we have Sales Loft. So it's really trying to maximize all of those tools. One great thing that you can do in LinkedIn Sales Navigator is look at any people that have been in your CRM that have changed roles in the past 90 days, which is always a leading indicator that they've come into a business to try drive some change, right? So one of those signals for me at the time was that the finance director in one of my top accounts had just newly came in, but it also been a customer of ours in the past. So knew that they knew our business, knew they knew the value, and it was really about a timing piece, right? Seeing if they were coming in to drive some change or if GoCardless was going to be top of the agenda.
Okay, so they were right, that stakeholder that you then found. That what is the story there?
Yeah, I mean, luckily enough, it was. I mean, I always think about outbounding strategies, and I speak to the AEs in my team today. We talk about, what is the best message? How do we tailor the message? And, in my experience, you can have the best message to the right person, but timing is a huge influence on that, right? And it's really about when is the right time for that customer to drive change. Sometimes you can be very early in the process where they're just doing their own self-discovery. Other times you're coming in where they've maybe decided that this is a project that needs to go and they're just trying to figure out what type of vendor they're going to work with. So yeah, getting in front of that customer on the right time was really important. And then once you get in there, it's about driving the values drivers, right? And communicating how we can support a customer like theirs.
Yeah, exactly. So if we think about that, think about how you can support them. You're essentially thinking about what their current state is that you might make better, right? Sort of like well, the state that you uncover for pain that you can solve for. So how did that work in the beginning of this sales cycle?
Yeah, I think at MEDDPICC, you guys talk about your M1s and your metrics and proof points. I think, Robert Cialdini in Influence talks about that a lot. We view the behavior of others as proof of correct behavior, right? And that also people persuade other people to do things. So it's about getting in and demonstrating where we've helped customers similar to those in the past and what kind of business outcomes they've had, right? And I think a huge part of that is how you command the message, right? What is the research that you do before that call that puts you in the right position to be able to articulate that? And I think it's a huge part of sales that people forget about, which is really preparation, right? So that preparation manifests itself in the early stage where I'm going to outbound or I'm going to prospect, but it also manifests itself in the early discovery stage where at a very high level, I understand what's going on in the industry. What are the value drivers of that business that they're focusing on? I'm trying to anticipate some of the challenges that they may be facing. I'm trying to hypothesize what are the implications of some of those challenges, how we can help them, where we've done it before, which is the proof points, and how we are uniquely positioned to do so. And if I have that huge part, when I go in or when I start my prospecting, I'm already in a very good position to drive value from day one.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. That's spot on, man. It's almost like I'm listening to pieces of our own MedPick masterclass there. But if you think about that stage of your deal, that period in the sales cycle, what about like stakeholders? Because this initial person that you found via the way that you just described, what was it? What would you say is their role? Were they like your potential champion, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so they were the finance director. They'd just come into the business. They'd worked with GoCardless before. They knew the
Hmm.
value that we were driving. So it was really about trying to have a conversation early doors just to see if this was something that was of interest to them, right? And I think when we look from a GoCardless perspective, who are the stakeholders, there's quite a wide variety of people that we can speak to. We can speak to the heads of product, we can speak to retention, growth, CTOs, CIOs, CFOs, all of the acronyms under the world. But I guess for the most part, it's probably finance directors, CFOs, and then there's another piece around technical capabilities, and then there's pieces around how easy is the user experience through a conversion standpoint. But in this instance, it was the finance director that was identified early as a champion because of their understanding of GoCardless.
Right. Yeah, I can see why that would work so well, right? Especially since you had worked with them before. But if you would consider this deal, and I think typically your other deals as well, like um, this, the stakeholders that you needed involved as well were more than just this person, right? So how did you ultimately? So what are some of the other stakeholders that you needed to get access to, and how did you get there?
Yeah, and I think a huge part of getting access to stakeholders is one in that initial discovery is trying to understand what are the high level problems, what are the high level pains, right? In this instance, we and as MedPick talked about financial efficiency and
Mhm.
people, and that really was what was broken down from this deal, right? Financially, there was high card costs. Efficiency wise, they were having high failures with their cards, which meant that they had to chase failed payments, which meant that there was a lot of people in their call centers calling up people trying to get payments back into the business. And then from a people perspective, it was inefficient teams, and the inefficient teams was around reconciling on the payments coming into the business. So when you break down those three components, there's really from a finance director standpoint, I need to speak to them about the costs that they're incurring. From a efficiency standpoint, it's who's in the call center, who's driving all of those calls through to the customers that haven't paid on time. And then from a people perspective, there's also the head of treasury and who's in their team as well. And then another component, as we discussed a little bit earlier, is around that technical integration,
Mhm.
right? So really high level, I'm trying to get my FD, who's my champion. I'm trying to get somebody from treasury. I'm trying to get somebody technical validation, and I'm also getting somebody from the call center. And I think to get them into a room, you need to be very clear with the champion to say, hey, I think we've uncovered something here. What I normally see in the sales cycles are these type of people coming into the deal. Do you think now would be a good time to bring them in? And obviously, if they say yes, you kind of know that you're on the road to verifying that you've got somebody that will champion this project. If they say no, then it's trying to understand like what are the reservations and how can we overcome them.
Yeah, yeah, that's spot on, man. And so, if you think about the state where they come in, would you say that based on the success that you've had with previous customers, together with the champion, are you then personalizing the potential outcome there by way of ultimately aligning what they are looking to achieve, so that you can get consensus almost on like a target for a partnership, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, right? I think it was in the Challenger customer. I read about this good few years ago, and it was talking about the idea of a collection of yeses versus the collective yes, right? And you
Right.
can individually have stakeholders say, "Yeah, this sounds great. Yes, this sounds great. Okay, I think this will work." And then all of a sudden, you get them all in the room, and it doesn't quite work, right? So it's trying to on an individual level understand the pains and challenges that they're facing, but then bringing them all into a room and almost acting like a facilitator to say, hey guys, this is what was important to each one of you independently, but when we talk about this together, does this all still make sense? And how can we drive consensus across all of the teams? I guess a champion will also help co-facilitate that, especially if they're in a place of influence and authority, that they can try and drive that. But I think also you as a salesperson has a responsibility to be able to share some of those learnings and also try to co-create or co-facilitate those calls.
Yeah, absolutely. And something interesting that I think you said a little bit earlier is like the different types of pain, and also how that relates back to the metrics that you have with this customer, right? And how the same metric can look very different from one stakeholder to the other, right? So that when you are the CFO compared to someone who is, say, more operational, the metric can be expressed, say, in an amount of hours that you would save, or sort of, be able to spend elsewhere. Or as a CFO would say, like, okay, well, what's the dollar amount of that, right? So I guess that like common consensus from various different perspectives is something to really get clarity on, and probably your champion is the best person to help you get to that understanding, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like when you have somebody new coming into the business, CFOs are historically are going to drive change very quickly in the first, few months that they're in business. But that doesn't always mean that they have the influence from day one. A lot of time in finance teams, people have been in there a long time and they understand the processes. So even though your finance director or your CFO might be a champion, they probably still have to get internal consensus from some of those people that have been there a long time, right? They have to act like internal change agents, but they also have to build that momentum internally. So it's trying to nurture those different conversations and understand the status quo. So yeah, it's a really interesting one around stakeholder consensus. And even though you think you have a champion, you still can't forget about some of those other people that may be blockers.
Yeah. Hey, Conor, what was the total time of this sales cycle? How long did it take you from like that initial stage that you talked about at the beginning of this session, and ultimately, the deal being booked in your systems?
It was around 6 months from outreach to close.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you think about that timeline in the perspective of pain, how did you sort of go about not only identifying and indicating towards implicating the pain, but doing that throughout, so that it sort of stayed top of mind, and that you were able to sort of get access to all of these stakeholders throughout the entire cycle?
Yeah. And it's a really good question, right? I think a huge part of uncovering pains is having a champion, right, who's bought into the problem that they're facing. And I think I often hear AEs talk about their customers not giving them enough information, or being closed off and not wanting to share some of them. And I think for us as a business, we're never going to be the cheapest, right? So it's imperative that we're able to build business cases demonstrating where we provide value and ROIs. So we really need to get good at uncovering, but it's like I feel like there's a misconception around discovery type questions, where what transpires with AEs is that we teach them to listen for keywords, right? Which is what we're talking about here, is around, okay, I've identified a pain, but I don't necessarily know how to indicate that pain or implicate that pain. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to be conversation, we're trying to be facilitators, we're trying to understand before the call what we're hypothesizing. So some of those questions are going to be validation questions, some of them are going to be deeper discoveries, and others are going to be consensus building. And then once we have that information, then we need to drive momentum, right? And the momentum piece is getting the right people in the room at the right time, making sure that, okay, let's speak about the customer service, let's speak about the treasury issues, let's speak about technical integration, maybe in parallel to maintain momentum. Let's understand when you want to go live and working backwards from that date. And really what we're talking about there is like a why now, right? Like, what is the compelling event, and how do we get that? And if you have that compelling event, then it becomes easier to gain momentum. And obviously the implication pains is really going to get you to the place of the why now. So yeah, I think it's like driving momentum, understanding the pains, and then making sure that you're holding people accountable to the why now, and keep circling back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to pick up on something that you said there, which is like the go live plan, right? And working back from the moment where the customer needs to go live with their solution, that you can tie back to the pain that they're trying to solve for, which is underpinned by metrics, making that an important thing to do, right? And so um, sometimes I hear some of the best sellers talk about the early introduction of like their MSA, terms and conditions, and so forth, to sort of save time later on in a deal. How do you go about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's a long time ago, one of my old bosses who was an MD for Dell said to me, if the contract's not out, it's never going to be closed, and so it's like the earlier that we can get that in front and uncover objections, uncover issues or challenges that might come up, the better, right? But then also there's a very fine line between, why are you sending this over to me? I've not even confirmed that I want to move forward with you. So it's almost trying to get a sense of, hey, customer, we've uncovered some pains here. I think we both can agree that this is something we want to proceed with. As part of that process, we understand that legal is going to be a part of it. Do you think it would make sense to maybe send you over the PSA now, and we can work in parallel? I think a huge part of that is, for a lot of salespeople, especially in my 10 plus years of sales, is that it's very often we don't get legal in very early, right? They've got a huge stack of contracts they're trying to get through. They don't want to start looking at stuff until they're sure it's going to close, right? And that can be challenging to get your champion to get that PSA at the top of a list of a legal person that's overwhelmed with lots of work to do. So yes, in theory, it'd be great to get that out early. Can we get it to the top of the list so they're actually going to review it, is another question. And
Yeah.
that's something that, yeah, it's a tricky one to navigate. But yeah, to your point, the earlier we get it out, the better.
Yeah, I think it was interesting how you talked about sort of the getting introduced to other stakeholders by explaining to your champion, like, hey, these are the typical individuals that we would see as part of your team, that we need you and me together to make this a success, right? So it becomes like a common goal. And I think that with some of like the paper process elements, and as part of like the go live plan, it can be the same thing, because you tie it back to whenever they need to start getting value from the solution, right? The go live date, which again is supported by all the things that we talked about. But then if you build in like the review on MSA a bit earlier, like I think it's a great um, way of for sellers to get ahead of delay later on in the process, perhaps.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, another part of that is, as part of the decision process, is board approval, right? It's like, okay, I need to go
Mhm.
and present this to the board, which was in this example as well. And then the CEO will, everybody, all the board will be there, but ultimately the CEO and maybe the CTO will make a decision on this. And a lot of the times we'll just naturally say, brilliant, okay, it's going to the board. But actually, maybe the board only meets once a month. Maybe the board only meets once a quarter. And if you don't have that in your timelines, now all of a sudden you've said, okay, well, legal's going to probably take a week, but actually I needed to give myself a wiggle room of a month for board meetings. And what date does that happen? And if I miss this one, then I'm out by a month, right? So I think board meetings and the part of the decision process is really important to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's actually a great shout. Hey, so I think we uncovered a lot here, especially about the initial stage and throughout the sort of the selling stage of the cycle, right? What is something that stood out for you specifically when it relates to stakeholders when bringing this deal home, when closing it?
Yeah, I reflected on this at the time, which I think is a really important thing for people to do, because if we're not
Hmm.
reflecting and being deliberate in what we do, we make the same mistakes. And I think two of the reflections I had with stakeholders was, one was C-level alignment. Sometimes it can feel unnatural to bring in that C-level or exec sponsor through the deal, because you've got such a good relationship with your champion. Everything is moving very smoothly. You're on course. And it's not to say that this delayed because I didn't do it, but I feel like if I had have gotten that C-level alignment earlier, it may have moved it by a couple of weeks. It may just given me that foothold that I needed at little moments in the deal. I think another piece is around legal and boards. Although I was able to uncover the board, I wasn't able to uncover the priority for legal. And we just weren't a priority for legal to get through that. And you don't know what's happening in the business where we've just acquired a new company and legal is working, 18-hour days to try and get this due diligence done or whatever the case might be. And I think, yes, you can have a contract on legal's desk, but where is it on the desk? Is it at the bottom of the pile or is it at the top of the pile? And it's trying to uncover that as well, which is a hard question to ask when you say, yes, it's with legal, but where is it on the priority list with legal? Because they're on a different, they don't care about your deal. They care about the macro kind of area. Like, okay, I need to close this new acquisition we've just done. So stakeholders for me in this instance was C-level and legal.
Yeah, and with the example that you're giving there, the kind of the power and influence that your champion has, and this is why it's so important, becomes super relevant again, right? So if you think about that go live plan, if legal is super busy, like this time of the year, like legal teams are getting sort of pulled from all sides, right? Because everyone needs something from them before the year ends, and customer might say like, yeah, we have it with legal, but it's probably going to take a while because they're super busy. How powerful is your champion to sort of get that from the bottom to the pile to the top of the pile, because you're together with them able to articulate why that is so why it's imperative, right? So that you can still get to that go live date as planned. And that's where you really need to have a champion, because if they don't have that power and influence, then that's not going to happen, and your deal slips out of the quarter, and you don't match the go live and the going live of the value delivery with the customer.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, because your champion can have power and influence in many departments, but that one department that you need them to have power and influence in, they may not, right? And that could be just internal conflicts, internal politics. They just don't have a good relationship with that person in procurement or legal or whatever it might be, which slows everything down. And maybe they're not going to say, hey, by the way, like, I don't have a good relationship here, and this might be slow for me, right? There's going to be a go slow, and I've had that in the past as well with certain deals where you just don't understand the dynamics internally.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, great insight, man. So I think that we've heard a lot of useful things, like the tools in the beginning, like Sales Navigator and Sales Loft, also a company that we get to partner with, by the way, really cool tech. But I also liked your M1 to M2 transition, right? Where you sort of take the quantifiable impact of value that you've already delivered for your current customers and translate them to the prospective customer that you're selling to in the early stage to earn the right to do discovery, because that's what it really is, right? The customer will be like, yeah, I don't know you yet. So talking about examples that you can underpin with quantifiable value from customers that you do already have that success with is extremely powerful. One key takeaway that I also had there is like preparation is key, right? I think that, and we talked about this a little bit before we went on the recording, like the amount of times that you still see people just shoot in a meeting without having an agenda, any sort of preparation. If you start doing that, you're already sort of ahead of most, right? And then paying throughout the entire cycle, getting access to teams like legal early, some really differentiating points there. So the last thing that I'll ask you on the deal specifically, before I go to the closing question for our session here today, it's like, if there's one piece of advice that you could give yourself from 1 year ago, specifically on this deal, to potentially do differently, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's maybe not with the deal. I guess I think it's about trusting the process, right? And often when we're coming into a macro environment where the market is tough, we need to be better, faster, more efficient than we've ever been. And sometimes when a deal comes onto our laps, we think, happy years, let's run with this and get it through as quickly as possible. And it's about taking a deep breath and saying, let's go through the process and let's deliver each stage and each step, not only from a sales process, but also from a buyer's process, to make sure that we're delivering what our customer needs at every engagement level. And I think if you do that at the end of the deal, 9 times out of 10, you'll be successful. If you start to get desperate, if you start to think, okay, maybe my pipeline's a little bit low, maybe this, that, or that, I'm trying to skip some steps and try to get this deal in quicker, they normally just dissipate and disappear. And I think the advice that I would give now to me still today going into this macro is trust the process, get a systems in place, and deliver deliberate execution every day.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. In a way, this sort of is saying similar things to how we think about deal confidence, right? And I found myself in places before where I wasn't like not sure what's going on. What do we need to do next, and how are we ultimately gonna be successful? And that might mean different things, right? It's not just winning deals; it can also just mean like spending your time on the right things in the right deals. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what the MEDDPICC as a qualification framework did for me. So to sort of bring in that framework to understand, like, okay, this is this is how you can understand what to focus on in what deals, and also to follow what process to ultimately eradicate that feeling of uncertainty that I think you were referring to as well. Okay, and so a second ago, Conor, you said like, hey, been in this in my career for like 10 plus years right now. If you could go all the way back and advise Conor from 10 years ago, give them one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
I think one would be probably be kind to yourself. I think that's probably, salespeople probably put the most pressure on themselves more than most, right? And we are constantly beating ourselves up over every little bit of information. So being kind to yourself is probably something that I would reflect on. But I think when I look across the 10 years, I think there's two things that jump out at me. One is that how we do anything is how we do everything. And that's really about our personal brand. And our personal brand starts from the day that we enter into the sales organization till the day we finish in our sales career, right? Not just within that organization. It's a very small market that we're in. People speak, and how you show up every day is how people will talk about you, right? And it's like, what do people say about you when you're not in the room? And I think as a young person coming into a sales career, we sometimes forget about that. Money's coming in, everything's great, but we forget about what people think about us and how we're showing up as salespeople. And I think the other one is around I think that's probably the main one is around focusing in on your brand, focusing in on delivering every day, and being kind to yourself when things don't go right. Because as the saying goes, we're really living for the 20% or the 30%, whatever that win rate is, right? The other 70% is you're losing. So you need to have thick skin and be ready to get up every day and go again.
Yeah. No, I think you put that beautifully well, and it really resonates with me as well. If I think about myself that time in career as well, I used to feel pretty bad if something didn't go the way that I wanted it to. But sometimes it was even because of poor qualification, and it shouldn't be in that deal in the first place, right? But I think it's a great piece of advice, especially for individuals that are a bit more early in career, Conor. So I appreciate that. I really appreciate and loved all the insights that you gave us today. So thanks a lot, and on to the next episode of Elite Dealers. So thank you very much for watching, and tune in next time.
Thanks, Pim.